And it does a couple of different things. One is it stores fat for calories, right, for energy storage. The other thing that it does is it kind of acts like a little bit of a cushion, right? So it's not super functional as a cushion in a bunny because it's very small, but in humans, right, it kind of drapes over your internal organs and kind of acts a little bit like a cushion, okay? The reason it's called the greater omentum is because of what it's attached to. So the stomach is on the left-hand side, and it essentially is like a big old bag, right? And so, how do I want to? The stomach is weird shaped.
That whole thing.
Yeah, this whole baggy thing, right? So, the stomach is kind of shaped like the letter J, sort of, right? So, J, okay? So there's this big part, and there's a skinny piece that kind of comes and sticks up. That skinny piece is called the pylorus, right? So this is the pylorus of the stomach. And then there's this like inner curve that's pretty short, and then there's this outer curve all the way around the outside. That outer curve, because it's big, is called the greater curvature. The inner one, because it's small, is called the lesser curvature. So the lesser curvature is this little curve right here. See how there's like a little curve right there? Okay? The greater curvature is essentially this whole outside curve, and that's what the greater omentum is attached to, is the greater curvature of the stomach. Okay? So this big bag, right, is the stomach. Now, these bunnies they're farm raised, and they're raised for food, right? They're meat rabbits. And so they're well fed, and they get fed bunny chow. So I just cut a little hole in the stomach. I would not recommend cutting into any other part of the digestive system because things get weird after this. Okay? But the stomach's, you've all vomited before. The contents of your stomach are basically chewed up food. Right? It's a little, weird, but it's not bad. So if you're easily grossed out, maybe don't look. But essentially all I'm pulling out here are chewed up rabbit food. You know the little green rabbit pellet food, right? That's essentially what I'm fishing out of here. So he had a nice meal before. Sometimes they're kind of hard to see when the stomach's been stretched out, but you see how it's like wrinkly, right? And so what those wrinkles do is they maximize the surface area, right? Remember my little piece of paper that I show you guys all the time about maximizing surface area, right? So they maximize surface area for absorption and that kind of stuff. But the other benefit is that they allow it to stretch out so that when the bunny eats, they can eat a lot and their stomach gets sort of stretched out. Yeah, and then their stomach shrinks as they digest their food. Okay? So that's the stomach. After the stomach, the next place the food goes is into the small intestine. Specifically, the small intestine has 3 regions. The first region is pretty easy to identify because it's unique. The last 2 regions of the small intestine don't really look any different from each other from the outside. They're different in their histology, but we're not doing that in here. So the way that you're going to identify them is based on proximity. Okay, so from the stomach, the food goes up into the pylorus, and then it goes into this skinny tube that's fairly straight that I'm holding right here, which is the first part of the small intestine. It's called the duodenum. So I know this is the duodenum because the duodenum is on the bunny's right-hand side, and it kind of comes straight down along this way. So it goes straight down. Okay? Then it starts to get coily. And so the coily parts, the first part of the coily part is called the jejunum. And then you have the ileum. So this is all jejunum. Jejunum, 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 jejunum. More jejunum. I'm tracing along. More jejunum. Probably about now it's the ileum. Ileum, 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 ileum. More ileum. It's very long. In case you hadn't got that yet. Yeah? Okay. It's held in place by this like sheer membrane called the mesentery. Right? And the mesentery is, a couple things, but it holds the intestines together, and it's also where blood vessels get to them. Yeah, you can see blood vessels in there. Okay? And so it holds it all together. And then it starts to get weird. Things get weird. Right? This thing that kind of looks like a big scary finger. Right? That's the appendix. Look how big that is. Right? Your appendix, you're a lot bigger than this bunny, and your appendix is only about this big. And this tiny little animal, look how big his appendix is. It's huge, right? So it looks like a weird, like, large finger without a fingernail. Like, I don't know. They're disturbing.
Is their appendix first?
Probably. I imagine so.
They just like die though.
Well, yeah. Yeah. Unless it's a really pampered bunny, but anyway. Okay, so that's the appendix. The way that it starts to get tricky is after the ileum. After the ileum, there's like this Y shape, and it's really hard to find on a rabbit where everything's all still intact and sort of together the way it's supposed to be. So in Harvey, what I did was I cut away his mesentery so that I could basically like unfold his entire intestine so you could like spread it out and follow it along. Okay, so I'll get him out and put him up here so that you guys can come and look at him in a little bit. But what happens is you go down the small intestine, so duodenum at first where it's straight, and then the curly bits that are near the duodenum are the jejunum, and then the curly bits that are near all this big lumpy stuff are the ileum. Yeah, so the jejunum and the ileum don't look different, but you can base it based on what it's near. Okay, this really big, fat, brown, lumpy thing is called the cecum, right? And so in humans, our cecum is super small. So it's about that big, our entire cecum, and our appendix kind of hangs off of it, right? So bunnies have a huge cecum, right? And then the other part, so the small intestine goes down like this, and it branches, so that one side is the cecum, the other side is the large intestine, or the colon, okay? The biggest way that rabbit anatomy is different from our anatomy is the digestive system. And the reason it's so different is based on diet, right? So our bodies evolved eating lots of different kinds of food, right? So omnivores, right? Eating meat, eating all kinds of plant material, but eating a lot of cooked food, right? That's one of the things that allows us to be so much smarter than a lot of other species, is that we discovered that we could use fire to cook food. And when you cook food, it's a lot easier to digest and you get more nutrients out of it, right? And that's why we have more nutrients to power our big fat brains, okay? So cooking is a really important part of what makes us human, okay? And so rabbits just eat leaves, right? They eat grass or whatever, vegetation, okay? Which is fine, but the problem with that is that there are no mammals that can actually digest the cell wall in plant material, okay? So since it's such a small part of our diet, it's fine. We actually really like cell walls in our dietary, in what we eat, because we call it dietary fiber, right? Keeps things moving along, you can't digest it, it's good. It's nature's scrub brush, okay? But if that's all you're eating, you're gonna have problems, because if you can't digest through all those cells, you're not gonna get nutrients out of your food, okay? So all the different animals that are herbivores have solved this problem different ways. And so the way that rabbits have solved the problem is they are called hindgut fermenters. So what that means is that little bunny Fufu here, what's his name, Richard? Richard eats his leaves. He eats his grass, right? Goes into his stomach, it gets mushed up and broken up, but he's not actually digesting through the cells because he doesn't have enzymes that can do that, right? So then this not very well digested food goes through his small intestine and goes to his cecum. And in his cecum, he has a ton of bacteria and other microbes that can break down those cell walls. So they break down all the cell walls and actually digest the bacteria, not Richard, but the bacteria that live in his cecum break down those leaves, right? So that now those nutrients are available. Well, the problem with being a bunny is we've already passed both the stomach and the small intestine, which is where nutrient absorption takes place. So what are we gonna do? Well, the way that rabbits do it is the contents of their cecum then move to their large intestine, or their colon, which is this thing, right? And then ultimately, that gets sent outside of their body, they poop it out, right? And then they eat it, right? So rabbits have two kinds of poop, right? They have first poop and they have second poop, right?
Like cow.
And the first poop,
Is that what cows do the same thing?
cows are different. They are instead of hindgut fermenters, they're foregut fermenters. So they do their fermentation in their stomach. But that's why cows constantly all day long are basically vomiting up their food and chewing it some more, because it ferments and then they and then they chew and then they swallow and then they and then they chew and they swallow, because they're doing their fermentation in their stomach as opposed to their cecum, right? So they poop out the first poop, and they haven't absorbed any of the nutrients yet. So they eat it again, right? And then it goes right down into their stomach. But that time, instead of going into their cecum, right, it as it's going through the small intestine, it actually, we're absorbing all the nutrients, right? And then instead of going into the cecum because all the nutrients are gone, that poop goes into the large intestine, right?
Does it like no?
And goes down. Well, like, you know, things get kind of diverted, right? And so then they poop out that second poop, and the second poop they don't eat because the second poop has all the nutrients taken out of it, right? And so they can. Well, it looks different. It looks different. I imagine. I don't know. I've never been a rabbit. I imagine it smells different. There's right. It's different, and so. It's very different in texture. One of you guys that owns a rabbit now you're gonna have to investigate.
I didn't know that I see these little bugs at home.
So and those are the second poop because they don't eat right. The first poop, they eat it like as soon as it comes out, they eat it. So you wouldn't see it. You wouldn't see it unless you were watching them. Unless you were watching them real careful. Like, hey, what's going on? What's going on? Yeah. If you spy on them, then you might see it. But they eat that, right? Because they haven't gotten the nutrients out of it yet. And so then the poop they leave is the second poop, right? Which they don't eat because it's all the little balls of dried up crap, right? So literally crap. So this thing that looks like it has little beads in it, that's the large intestine, and this is second poop. Right? So that's all, right? It's little hard pebbles, right? It's making its way out. Yeah, and so you can see there's more small intestine over here. So what their colon does is it absorbs all the water, right? And it gets all hard when you absorb all the water. So there's more little pebbles, right? Little pebbles. So this is all large intestine or colon, right? No. And this is large intestine too, right? The really wrinkly bits. The really wrinkly bits. The fat thing is the cecum, okay? And so